Now that the recording is in progress, I'm going to get started. Thank you, Madalena. Um, Welcome to the Jewish Collaborative of Orange County. I am your host for the Adult Learning Institute today, Chazan Matt Austerklein, and I want to thank Madalena Garza and Rabbi Cantor Marcia Tilchin for welcoming me to teach a little bit today about prayer and polemic, defending cantors in the 1700s and today. So why am I talking about this? So the genesis of this talk and of my PhD research, just a little about me, I am a cantor. I'm about to be the cantor of Congregation Anshe Torah in Plano, Texas. But also I am just completed my PhD dissertation in Jewish studies at Halle-Wittenberg University in Germany, although I've been writing it all from home and in English, Baruch Hashem. So the genesis of this talk and my research comes to my days in Cantorial school at the Jewish Theological Seminary. Now, I came to Cantorial school as a religious person. I chose the life of a cantor because it would give me, a musical person and a davener, a praying person, the opportunity to develop as a religious Jew, which a career in the music world really didn't offer in the same way. But I became very surprised when my vocation was actually indicative to many people around me of a different reality. It was so weird. For me, people would meet me and learn that I was a cantor, and it meant to them that I probably wasn't that religious or knowledgeable at all. All of the serious Jews around me were becoming rabbis or educators, but I, as a cantor, while bound as a religious exemplar, was at the same time suspect of being ignorant and or secular. So at the same time, I was also noticing in my life that there was a distinct cultural difference between cantors and other types of Jewish professionals. Many Jews, notably rabbis among them, learned their music orally via in-person experience, going to minyan, going to shul, listening to online recordings, going to singing circles, and they were often attracted to charismatic and more equity-based loads of leadership, where all the voices were pretty much equal. Cantors, however, were socialized into more priestly ideals of the realm of music, knowing how to read sheet music, notation, the spirituality of complex music, hierarchical musical forms where you have a conductor, you have a choir, you have specialization, and the importance of received tradition, minhag, customs, nusach, and even the stakes of Western sound in Jewish musical practice. So almost like, anyone here know, raise your hand if you know who Henny Youngman is. Henny Youngman? Oh, I have so many hands. I'm so proud of you all. So almost like the views of Henny Youngman in a one-liner about men and women, right? Or like the views of men and women in a fight between Ralph and Alice Cramden. Rabbis and cantors as a social type, in my experience, were in this complementary marriage, yet often had intensely contrasting intuitions about prayer, music, and society. So, as a sort of cantorial feminist, in a way, I was sort of fed up over bickering of what should be a collaborative and amicable relationship. This led me ultimately to the JTS library, where I began to look up literature on rabbis and cantors, and which ultimately led me to many of the primary source documents, which I've unearthed, and which we will look at today. My PhD research looks at the emergence of the cantorate as a musical profession and as a distinct vocation in the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Its increasing independence from the rabbinate and its emergent self-awareness as a profession with a divinely inspired focus in music. Now, to get to the root of this story, let us take a little trip and let me do what we do in the old country. It's called the sharing of the screen. We will have the screen sharing, yes. We have it, yes. Raise your hand if you can see it. Also geht. Okay. We will play the slideshow and we will go back to the beginning, to Prague. Some cities are good for music. Vienna, Odessa, New York, Cleveland. Well, Prague is definitely one of those cities. I just want to give you a sense of this. In the year 1700, there were about 41,000 people living in the city of Prague. Of those people, 11,000 of them were Jews. So this is 1 in 4 people, and they were all mostly in one real section called the Yosefov. So Prague was the largest settlement of Jews in Christian Europe in the early modern period. It's like the New York City of that time. And although the 30 Years' War was really bad for Christians, and Prague was actually pretty good for Jews because the Habsburg Empire protected them. And we had this huge swelling of not only population, but also of music and Jewish culture. Prague's Jewish musicians, as Feldman described recently, were known actually to Christians since the early 1500s, and they were heard in courts at the weddings of Christian noblemen. They even went on the road to places like Leipzig. People ask me, did Bach ever meet any Jews? The Jews were not allowed in his city at the time, except if he went to the trade fairs in Leipzig, he might have heard a klezmer musician or two. By the 1600s, Jewish musicians had incorporated as a formal guild. I just mentioned the name of it, and you might know it. It was called the Klezmer Guild. Klezmer is not just a name for a Jewish musician. It's a guild member. It's someone with professionalized status. So we see in this period, for the first time, Bohemia, Moravia, and a little bit in East Central Europe and Poland over the border in places like Krakow and Lviv, we see Jewish musicians having a professionalized status that they will even put on their very own tombstones. And we're going to see a little bit about that in a special way in just a minute. Let's see that in the context of cantors. And this is really exciting because I discovered this source 6 months ago. And it really hasn't seen the light of day in a long time. It is called Michtam LeDavid. It's housed in the Bodleian Library at Oxford. When I was looking this up in the catalog, the entry indicated that part of this book had something about advice, quote unquote, for cantors. Now, if you're a cantor, usually advice is often a code word for criticism, and this manuscript did not disappoint. But what lay within was far more than just cantorial criticism. The author, his name is Rabbi David Ulmo, was a German-born rabbi who emigrated to Bohemia, and he lived in Prague at the turn of the 17th century. It was still the late 1500s and early. His book dates to about 1600, maybe 1605, something like that. In addition to being a rabbi, Rabbi Ulmo was a klezmer musician and a very serious mystic. That's why you've got this graphic here. In fact, most of Michtam LeDavid concerns Rabbi Ulmo's fervent advocacy of Ashkenazi Jews adopting Kabbalah, that is specifically Lurianic Kabbalah, and the Kabbalah Shabbat service. I know lots of people here have daven Kabbalah Shabbos, right? Have daven Kabbalah Shabbat. It's standard now, but back then it was super new. And we see that it migrated, you can see in the top left, from Tzfat all the way through to Venice, and then further through to Prague. And with the expansion of Kabbalah, we see the increase of musical activity. Circles of people getting up early in the morning, forming things called the Baruch She'amar Society, where they sing musically, beautifully, the Baruch She'amar. We get things that we'll see later in Prague, like instrumental Kabbalah Shabbat services and other little things called confraternities, where people are meeting to do extra musical activities. But of course, which just makes complete sense if you want to feel joy. Which is a religious, goal in Kabbalah and mysticism? What better way than achieving it through more music? Madeline, just make sure to let people in through that. I think we have, there we go. We're good. Okay. And by the way, I can't see things in the chat very well. So if you want to ask me a quick question in the middle of the talk, I'll leave time at the end. But if it's urgent, then you can unmute. Now, in fact, one of the things that makes Michtam LeDavid, again, written around 1600, 1605, Shakespeare has just become part of the King's Men over in England under James I, right? One of the things that makes Michtam LeDavid, this manuscript, so special is it gives us new insights into the relationship between Jewish mysticism and Jewish musicians. Rabbi Ulmo's manuscript actually comes before Kabbalah Shabbat. The service was even published. Its first publication year in Prague is 1615. So this guy is in the vanguard of bringing Lurianic Kabbalah to the mass. he wants to bring this service, which, by the way, is going to eventually become very, very musical in Prague. And he is advocating at the manuscript level before it's even gone to print. So it's a very exciting source. And what's more, we know, as I said, that Prague's Jewish musicians, Prague's klezmorim, were involved in Friday night musical services, the original Friday Night Live, already by the middle of the 17th century, by the 1650s, with several synagogues in Prague employing cantors, singers, and professional instrumentalists, even using a small organ among them, to welcome the Shabbat with joy before the sun set. So, what we have in Michtam David is an exciting, new, and very, very early source of the history of not just Jewish music, but Jewish liturgy and of Kabbalah itself. But I'm going to let the rabbi speak for himself. Rabbi Ulmo's experience as a Jewish musician follows that of others in Prague who were sought after dance musicians, performers at Christian weddings, feasts, and even religious services. Here, if a reader would manifest for this, that would be great. Here, Rabbi Ulmo colorfully describes his experience at a gig with his dance band appearing next to a more formal Christian ensemble playing classical music. Can I get a reader for this? You don't have to read the Hebrew. You can just read the English.
Oh, I'll read.
Go, Shaggy, thanks.
From early days, I was often in the company of respected and important princes, dukes, and great authorities, with my musical instruments and with a band of distinguished klezmorim, im chabuta kli zmirot chashuvim, when I saw there a number of great and very important princes, and there were their number of ensembles of non-Jewish instrumentalists who had among them great artists that would also play before them distinguished, stirring, and highly glorified melodies. Thus I trembled and I was fearful and overwhelmed together with my friend, and we were at the end of our rope as to what to do. And I set my mind to search out and seek after distinguished melodies such as they enjoyed and desired, and not those melodies that we regularly play to get people to dance or to play at feasts before drunk and distempered thieves.
Thank you, Shaggy. Thoughts on this source? What's your impression?
It's interesting that he was. They were looking for things that would stand out, as opposed to what he said. Would he play for drunk and distempered thieves?
Yeah, I've never seen this, but it's in Ashkenazi sources. It's very rare to have sort of grass is greener, looking at the music of Christian society. But here we have a klezmer who's a rabbi, nonetheless, looking and listening, like, oh my goodness, this is beautiful. Our dance melodies that play at Sheva Brachas and at feasts, are dreck, like they're not good. And so it's a really interesting, like, looking over at what music could possibly be like, even while he is here at the court, playing together with the klezmorim and with non-Jews. Which, by the way, their melodies are referred earlier in the manuscript as the wisdom of the nations, chokhmat haumot, that is called muzik, or music. Right? Music is a thing that's them. This music stood in contrast to the dance tunes and street music that klezmorim were well known for. But don't take Rabbi Ulmo as just a grass is greener kind of Jewish musician. He was likely a cantor himself, and he is a staunch defender of traditional synagogue music, encouraging his cantorial colleagues to use the old familiar melodies, which are taught from one's youth and which enable one to pray. He is even the first writer that I have seen centuries in advance of our modern cantorial apologists to claim that Ashkenazic high holiday melodies come from time immemorial back in Jewish antiquity. Can I get another reader for this source? Please.
Therefore, we must make our prayers and services with holiness and purity, using our old melodies of Shabbat and festivals, which without doubt were established by the Tanaim and Amoraim, the Talmudic rabbis, especially the melodies of the high holidays. To these, some cantors come to add, intermixing and exchanging some foreign tunes between these reverent melodies, It makes my soul grieve.
Thank you, Daniel. I appreciate it. What's your thoughts on this source as you read it?
Uh, well, what you said, he's citing the melodies as being very ancient. And he's upset by modern trends that the other secular non-Jewish music is being used in the services.
It's interesting, right? Thank you, Daniel. It's interesting because he clearly likes classical music that he heard, right? He's a gigging guy. He's seen the world. He just thinks, no, this doesn't work in shul specifically. I also like him because again, we had the Maharil, right? It was the Rabbi Jacob Merlin in the 15th century and 14th century rules that we should preserve the customs, the musical customs of our people. The Maharil is one of the major sort of conservative figures in the history of Jewish music, making Ashkenazi Jews protect their old tunes in a very, very specific way. But here we have 150 years later, a legend that takes the tunes far beyond even Ashkenaz, but back to the Talmud. Our tunes come from the Talmudic era, which is a really, I've never seen this legend in any other part of the history. Ria, you had a question.
Yeah, I wanted to see, because it harkens to even now where the value of what people consider to be really the Jewish melodies, really the correct one to use, and it harkens back to some time, and it is I believe it's a fantasy that there was the real stuff, and what we're doing is we're fooling around with it, and we shouldn't. We should go back to the real stuff.
Well, thank you, Ria. I appreciate that. And there is some truth that, it's not like it feels good when things are old, but that's not always true, right? There's that whole Chazonim here will know that story, that was in, I think it was in the Journal of Synagogue Music. Max Helfman is this, big composer and Jewish music professional, says to Cantor Pinchas Spyro, "Oh, this melody is so old. Shalom Aleichem, Molochei Hashores, Molochei Elyon," right? Sounds so old. And Cantor Spyro goes, "No, my friend wrote that." And Helfman says, "No way, he didn't write it. That's from the old country. That's from years ago." And he writes, of course, to Israel Goldfarb, who said, "Yes, I wrote that melody on the steps of the library in 1918. And by the way, you're all singing it wrong." So, we like to feel like there's antiquity because then we're connected to our ancestors, but it's not always as, true. Anonymity in some ways is Judaism's great compliment to our best composers. But what we do have here, and I'll show you the next source, and maybe another reader will also manifest, is that we have Rabbi Ulmo really just, it's not just because we have a problem with melodies because they're old, but because if you're adding too much new music, this is what Rabbi Ulmo says about that. Let me get another reader, and then we'll parse it out together.
I'm glad to read.
Please.
Despite the fact that these cantors are all, without a doubt, wise, discerning, and experienced, and fear the Lord as well, they should not rely on their understanding, saying, "I have studied the wisdom of Israel. I shall go and study the wisdom of the nations," which is music. It is impossible for a person to think pure thoughts in prayer and to be precise with great depth in fear and trembling with those foreign melodies, specifically when one makes several melodies, a novelty each time, ever changing, one melody joined to the next. And even if the cantor is wise and sharp, unlike myself, it would be impossible for him to have intention with these foreign melodies as composed, or to think pure thoughts in prayer with reverence.
Thank you, Cantor Haley. What in your own words, what is the rabbi Chazan saying, and what do you think of it?
Well, he's saying that it affects one's kavanah to have these alternate associations with the music. And honestly, I can understand that. It's, when we have like we hear about things like, oh, it's a Disney Shabbat, or a this or that, and we use tunes with other associations. Sure, it's novelty, but where is our intention? It's a problem.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said. That's the question. Where is our intention? To add to what Cantor Haley is saying, which is totally on point, right? He's seeing, and by the way, many of us have been to services, right, where it's just one melody rolling into the next. But here it's an issue of I think it's intensified by Kabbalah, right? If you look at if you look actually at a Sephardic Siddur, they often have more of them in there. Prayers were meant to be infused with a secondary level of meaning all the time, because you were joining the God with God's Shekhinah by saying the words with precise thoughts. And he says, how can I have precise thoughts when we're just rolling through new tunes? I don't have the brain space to have intensive Kabbalistic kavanah and this new musique, right? This new tech is going to take up, getting the coloratura just right on this very florid setting that I've chosen, I'm not going to be thinking about Hashem Yisborach anymore, right? I'm going to be thinking about the technique rather than the kavanah. So already in 1600, at the inception of Ashkenazi Jews really getting a chance to absorb the Christian world's musical tech, there is this tension in a mystical sense that maybe I won't have enough kavanah to do both. That's his claim, at least. That's his claim, at least, which is, again, it's a fascinating one. But let's finally, Rabbi Ulmo actually tantalizes us with something we have never actually had in the Jewish music historical record before. This, I think, is new, because I don't know of any others. We have two actual names of klezmer dances that were done in the late 1500s and early 1600s. Can I get another reading for this fantastic image from the life of a klezmer? You don't have to read the Hebrew, just the English. Another reader? I can't call on people because my mouse doesn't let me. Oh wait, my mouse will let me call on.
You have a volunteer. Linda Shivers is volunteering.
Thank you, Cantor Haley. Linda, please. Cantor Linda, please.
And now, in place of those beautiful melodies, old, pleasant, and very good ones, which were our ancestors' heritage, as I explained, the cantors have switched things up, changing a portion and making melodies in the synagogue with their mouth, which the klezmorim regularly play on the flute to make people join in the dances. For at festive meals where the guests recline for a spell, then the klezmorim regularly make dances with drum and lyre on flute and lute with cymbals and trumpets, known as shalmei or trompeten, as they are called. Such melodies, known in Yiddish as Barentanz, Hauprecht, and the like. They make a number of insane melodies, nigunim mishugaim, humming to the tune of the lute. Considered like David himself, they think that their instruments are like David's instruments and that they are for the heavens, yet they are actually for pleasure alone.
Thank you, Linda. Linda, what do you think of his observation?
Well, it's totally still done. He didn't infect anybody. I don't know that we're using klezmer melodies so much anymore, but certainly happens.
It's true, and thank you, Linda. And it certainly does happen. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, one of the big controversies hundreds of years later in the golden age of Chazonis was, can you do a liedel in the davening? Can you do a little tune? Rosenblatt got famous for doing it. All his big recitatives, they end with a little liedel, a little tune at the end of the whole thing. It became a cantorial convention in this era. So here too, we have a question of what tunes are appropriate, right? And by the way, Bärentanz, this is actually German for, or Yiddish, but it's also German for bear dance. So where are the klezmorim getting a bear dance from? I don't know. There are two that we have records of in the dance repertoire, one in England and one that's continental. And I think if you email me, I can send you a link to a performance of one, because it might be it, but it might not. Anyway, for me, this fantastic paragraph does a number of things. It confirms what Edelson, that great scholar from 100 years ago, he first suggested, that the klezmorim taught cantors in the ways of music. And you see the leak from the street to the synagogue. And indeed, Rabbi Ulmo, who is such a devout Kabbalist, literally says, I mean, I'm almost verbatim, we have to keep the sounds of the synagogue and the street apart. For him, those are Kodesh and Chol, and you just can't mix them. They're good. The Chol is good in the Chol, and the Kodesh is good in the Kodesh, right? Outside British, inside Yiddish, right? That classical liberal sort of thing. But that's a real, we see that this is osmosis, this absorption is happening in real time here in 1600 from the klezmorim, who, by the way, are playing the Christian, they're batting for the Christian life cycle. In 1640, and about 40 years after this, not only will they get permission to play at Christian weddings, but baptisms, feast days, and religious services. As a klezmer colleague of mine once said, one cannot make a living playing for one God alone. So, lo and behold, the klezmorim are making a broad business across the religious spectrum. But the main point is that we see they also hear not only that Edelson is right in that regard, but that Ulmo describes the activities of klezmer musicians and festive meals and the types of instruments. And again, these two little dance tunes that are for musicologists, so like scrumptious. We're gonna find, where's the Berentanz, where's the Hofbrech? Can we recreate this? But beyond that, as sort of in a more practical vein, this shows us that even at the turn of the 17th century, we have cantors experimenting with new professional competencies and new sounds far beyond the typical synagogue soundscape. Not just foreign melodies like you'd have in the medieval period, but complex music, which would become part of a growingly distinct musical vocation. Here's another example. Anyone recognize this piece of music on the top? Who's the composer? Hebrew.
Rossi?
It's Rossi, that's right. Hebrew notation. This is a Rossi original from 1623, but it's got some extra stuff on it. You see, this copy of Salomon Rossi's Hebrew Madrigals, which is part of the Oppenheim collection in the Bodleian Library, also like Vichan David, it belonged to this book belonged to Rabbi David Oppenheim, but right before it, he had two Ashkenazic owners, one of whom was a cantor and the head of the Jewish community in Nikolsburg in Moravia. So this is a Czech-speaking, in the Czech Republic now, southeast of Bohemia and Prague. This is a Czech-speaking part of the world. His name is Rabbi Moshe ben Abraham. He's a cantor. He's the head of the community. His father is a cantor in Krakow. And Rabbi Moshe likely gave this copy to Rabbi Oppenheim, who was the chief rabbi of Prague, who was this big book collector. But let's see what's going on below, because we have here, what we're seeing here is these are mutation psalmization exercises. This is the beginning of any music treatise. We have the beginning of any music treatise. And so we have here in this source the history of not just one book, but two books. After all, Ashkenazic Jews, remember, the staff notation, music notation, didn't come from Jews. It came from the church. It was invented, it was inspired by, Charlemagne in the 8th century and evolved through the church and the monks and through the standardization of ecclesiastical chant. But Jews, especially Ashkenazi Jews, we didn't have access to any of that. So here we see a cantor for the first time learning how to read sheet music and writing out the exercises from a music treatise like Fink, if those of you who are studied this stuff, right? From a 16th century music treatise or a 17th century music treatise here in the margins of his copy of Rossi. So this is an amazing source. Again, by the way, this is solfege in Yiddish if you're trying to read it. This is going to do. It's how mensural notation, which is the precursor which is the precursor. Susan, if you could mute, that would be great. This is the precursor to notation as we know it today. The main point is this. Ashkenazi Jews, and indeed this cantor, begin to see that music notation, or musica, might be able to be used by Jews in service of God. And Rossi, while in his own era, he was like a flash in the pan. It was a short-lived experiment. For these Bohemian Ashkenazi Jews, becomes a piece of Hebrew music notation that legitimates their own learning of this Western technology. There's precedent for Hebrew sheet music, and now there will be new Hebrew sheet music. And indeed, he will, in another part of this source, we'll see here, this is what he writes, thank God I can actually sing this. And then at the bottom here, we have this melody. This is a Moshe writing down someone else's tune. This is a Hodu for Rosh Chodesh by a chazan from Brisk. Now, we might take this for granted today. Of course, we have publishers. Of course, we write our melodies down. But back then, it was totally new. The idea that you would actually transcribe melodies for posterity is a chiddush. It's a new idea in Judaism, and is the beginning of really just the seed that's just being watered for the eventual flowering of Jewish musical expression through music notation, through Western musical notation. So I find this source very, very exciting. Now, we actually know one more cantor that had access to this very copy of Rossi. His name is Rabbi Shlomo Lifshitz. Rabbi Shlomo Lifshitz, and he's, by the way, a big figure in the history of the professionalized cantor. He was one of Rabbi Oppenheim's prize yeshiva pupils in Nikolsburg, and in this era of musical growth, Rabbi Lifshitz achieved what many other cantors could not. He became full-time. In his second pulpit, he wrote in his biography in this book to Dutch Shlomo, he writes little biographical vignettes, and he writes that in his second pulpit he says, Ani parakti et ol hashchita me'al tzavarai. I threw off the yoke of shchita, of ritual slaughter from my shoulders, and I didn't have to teach children anymore. Again, these are typical occupations if you're a cantor. You gotta teach the kids, you gotta shech the animals. But he didn't have to do that anymore. He could become the Baal Lechat. He could have one job, which is to lead the prayers with intensive kavanah, with intensive intention. Now he, from his little job, was headhunted to come to Prague to become a prominent cantor. He became the sort of chief cantor of the Pinchas and Zigoiner synagogues in the first decade of the 18th century. And from those experiences and his other subsequent gigs in Frankfurt and then in Metz, where he spent most of his career, Metz in France, he wrote this epic cantorial manual, Sefer Tudat Shlomo. For those of you who studied HUC, if you're a cantor, Cantor John Haddon wrote his rabbinic thesis on this book, and I have largely picked up on some of his work and extended it in my own sort of broader PhD work on the professionalization of Ashkenazi cantors in this period. So he writes right here, if you can read the Hebrew, it's fun, but I'll do the translation for you. He writes about the Prague community during his tenure. He talks about it positively and also negatively. I'm translating, he says, as for me, Bioti Chazan Demata, and when I was a communal chazan, the chief chazan of Prague, the elders of the generation said that a while ago, all the chazanim were together in love and brotherhood and peace and friendship. And this is evident by the fact that they would study and ask questions about Yom Tov a few days before holidays, Passover laws on Passover, Shavuot laws on Shavuot, Sukkot laws on Sukkot, and all the customs, of course, of the high holidays in their places. And there were among them some cantors who were skillful in, you can see it in Chochmat HaMuzika. This is the fourth line from the bottom. You'll see a little chip that shows you that it's a foreign word. Bifrat Chochmat HaMuzika. Actually, it appears a little earlier too. And they were, every festival, they would write new melodies that were renewed every morning. And there were other cantors who learned melodies from them, and they were thankful and not embarrassed. But Now it's not that way, he writes. Everyone builds a stage for himself and has no fear of God and doesn't want to study from his friends, saying, who is so and so that I will study from him? I am ani ba'atzmo mishorer tov. I am a good singer. He should come and study with me. So what do we learn? This is the turn of the 18th century. It's about 1700. So in Prague, the Cantorate has become a professional community. Remember, there's 11,000 Jews, there's 13 synagogues. That means that there is a major critical mass for the first time of cantors all in the same city. And they've got their own little assembly, so to say. So, and they are coming together, studying their laws and studying musical innovations, including Chochmata Musika, including that science of music stuff that is Western-ish, or that they claim for themselves as well. But according to Rabbi Shlomo, egos and reputations are beginning to get in the way. When cantors are becoming involved in musical innovation and when their jobs are increasingly determined by their reputation, then fraternity is possible, but competition is always a temptation. Now we know that Rabbi Lifshitz saw Rossi because in this book, he describes it as Sefer Yashan, the old book, and he quotes page after page of all of the rabbi little stamps of approval. There are 5, they're called haskamot, rabbinic approbations. Another way of saying rabbis write a whole paragraph. They write the foreword. There's 5 rabbinic forewords to Rossi, including by Rabbi Leon de Modena, famously, about why using Western harmony is so good in the synagogue. And Rabbi Lifshitz, Cantor Lifshitz, quotes all of them, word for word, one after the other, straight like he had the book, the original Rossi introduction, right in front of him. So again, we know that Rabbi Shlomo has exposure to music, to musica, through Rossi. Now, like in the Klezmer Guild, we see in Lipshitz's description that cantors in Prague are organized and they're aware of their vocational identity and that they have a new expanding canon of expertise. Being here self-aware, and it is indeed in this era that we get 2 or 3 other books which are cantorially self-aware books by cantors about the cantorial profession, and often, as we'll see at the end in the next 20 minutes, defending the cantorial profession. These include Sefer Shirei Yehuda from 1697 in Amsterdam, and also Reach Nichoach from Fürth and Lipa in the Czech Republic in 1724. All 3 of these books have cantors directly talking to their brothers as Achai HaChazanim, my brothers the cantors, relating to an established professional community. And by the way, I can even show you a picture. This is Prague in 1716, and when King Charles VI, the Holy Roman Emperor, had a son, the Jewish community there, which again is 11,000, well, probably going on 12,000 people, decided to have a bash of a gigantic Baroque style parade. And there are 5 different little like Baroque festival books that document what happened. This is from one of them, from the Yiddish one, and this is a big picture. And where are our cantors? Let me see. Dun da da da. Number 19. There they are. Well, actually, they're not technically number 20, but you can see what's described under number 19. It says here we have it says on the Yiddish, there they are, Volk noch 4 Passionen. Then 4 people come carrying an organ. By the way, see that little thing that the rabbi's playing on? This is not your typical church organ, right? This is called a portative. It is a movable organ, or a positive. It's a type of movable organ that takes a couple people to carry, but that was meant for moving around. There are even smaller ones that you can even have on your just on your side that people play. But this is like a standard organ that you would find in a bar and not a church. So the organ is played upon rabbi by Rabbi Marum, son of Rabbi Ash. And then come great cantors from every synagogue in our community who pleasantly sing and make music together with the organ. So what's cool about this is, remember that professional community we talked about? You can see it. There they are. They're all together with the rabbi on the organ, singing in a public political event honoring the birth of an heir of the emperor. So it shows you again their unity as a professional class, as musical representatives of a greater community in which they have a great part to play. So what's also cool here is that, and just like the cantors are professional in their music and professional in their organization, they start to get real professional documents. Before, you really, if you were a cantor and getting hired, you probably got a couple lines in a pinkas, like in a board minute book. But here we have a real contract, like 2 pages, full-on contract. This one is from the Tikkun of Rabbi David Oppenheim. It's this like standard document book where he has all of his contracts in them. Sorry if the Hebrew is a little. This is Ashkenazi Hebrew handwriting, right, from the 18th century. So it's hard to read, but I've transcribed it in case you're curious. What's really cool about it is that it is a flowery contract. It even uses ketubah language to describe the community as the bridegroom and the cantor as the bride, and that we will give you housing, we will take care of you, lazim farnes, right? All the Aramaic about how the husband is supposed to take care of the wife. And indeed, the cantor is required here to be pious and know the prayers in both their pshat, their plain and their mystical meanings, to chant the prayers of the community throughout the year, to be at synagogue every day, to read the Torah, know its grammar and meaning, and then you're going to get fined for every error. So it was intense. Precision, very important. Now, the community was to give him ample compensation, and it says that he should not lack for anything. What's crazy about this is not just the formality, right? But remember, the earliest halachot, the earliest laws about the cantor in Mishnah Tanit, are the shliach tzibur should be poor, right? We have really moved from this idea of sort of the poor, most suffering person in the community, or maybe the most pious but often suffering, whose house is empty and who has lots of kids, like some of these halachas say, to someone who's a paid professional that we actually want to do well and to be well paid. And there's actually a joke about it. There's a reason the count is there. In Rabbi Lifshitz, in his book, he writes that the Sefer Mitzvot Katan, the Semak rules, that cantors, quote, should pronounce each and every word like they're counting gold coins. So what does Rabbi Lifshitz say in 1718? He says, quote, by way of a joke, I said it is right to give the cantor a significant salary so that he has something to count, and a voice in the habit of counting, and that which is customary to be counted itself, i.e. enough money, that he will pronounce the words like he is really counting gold coins. So remember, this is new. Rabbi Lifshitz is one of the first guys to make it as a full-time cantor, right? He's doing this full-time, and which cannot be contemplated without parnosa, right? The cantor for years has had to do all this part-time gigging, but now Sam Rosenbaum is smiling right now, listening to me hear this, right? Now the cantor can actually have a real steady job, right? Because he has enough parnasa, he doesn't have to go around looking for this gig and that gig. I got to do shchit, I got to go teach the kids, I got to go be a witness, a professional witness, I got to do all these things. There are some things that are circumscribed by the contract, but in the contracts that we have, and we have actually one that's for a famous cantor, they're making enough buck, and they have a parsonage, and they can live. Now, despite the fact that cantors are able to be full-time, if they're starting, it's a new paradigm. It's a new paradigm. The medieval paradigm is still there, and we see it here in Prague. Even though there are cantors with a special musical focus, doesn't mean that I've stopped doing all these other religious activities in the community. This is actually a poem in honor of Cantor Lippmann Poppers. He died in 1656. It's a long time ago. He was well known, and on his epitaph, he was described as Rosh Meshorerim, a chief of singers, learned in Gemara and Rashi and Tosafot, meticulous in Talmudic debate, overseer of all the Mohalim, of the circumcising guys, right? Head of redeeming captives and of Bikur Cholim, visiting the sick. So he's so beloved that actually a guy wrote a poem in his honor. And this is the poem. And it was actually, don't let the Latin fool you. It's there because a Christian actually republished this poem, a Christian Hebraist named Christoph Wagenseil. That's why the Latin's there. And he's transcribing Yiddish. This is Western Yiddish, but it's transcribed in Faktur, in German characters. Now I can actually, what's cool is I can actually sing it for you a little bit. It says in the Hebrew, Benigun Bruns, it looks like Brunslich, but actually it's Braunslied. Now what is Benigun Braunslied? We have to remember that in this era of oral melodies, most pop songs were sung, or pop, when I say pop, I mean published books and poems that were sung to orally transmitted melodies. Here is the Braunslied. It is actually a German love song. Braune Farb und Freundlichkeit seid einander einverleibet. It was notated in 1646. So this is a little bit of what this might have sounded like. Ein Säufer sein Gleichen zu finden nicht in der ganzen Welt von alle geschritt. Sie frei teure hatte geschrieben Unzahl, sein Sichus soll uns bestehen überall. Ein Chasen für der ganze Welt, ein Jeglicher wird mir bezeugen auf den Herd. Kein so ein Chasen war nicht gehört, durch sein Sichus sollen wir nicht werden verstört. And there's about 65 verses of that thing, all in honor of him. So I just wanted to share a little bit of his story. However, despite paragons like Rabbi Lipschitz and Rabbi Lippmann Popper and Cantor Lippmann Poppers, not everybody was happy with the innovations of the cantorial world. Jewish communities in this time period, both in East Central and Western Europe, had more power to choose their cantors, and this had a very interesting effect. Here's what has happened, which makes the cantor in need of defense come 1700. And this is my last little section, and then I should end right at, I'll probably end right at 1:30, and then I'll stay on if there are people who want to ask questions. I'll be here for a little bit, no problem. Think about it. In the Middle Ages, being a cantor required a very high level of religious knowledge. You had to memorize huge amounts of liturgy, and not even though included in the Machzor, right? Because there only were like 1 or 2 books per shul. They were all handwritten on vellum and everything. But in that day, in the Middle Ages, you were a poet. You had to make up your own poetry, memorize a ton, and the music as well. But the age of print changes everything for cantors, because the text freezes. It is printed, and now it cannot be changed. This does a few things. The prayers are fixed, and therefore, you don't actually have to be a slam poet to interpret them anymore. All you need to do is be able to memorize the tunes or to make up the tunes and to decode the words. So this allows a broader pool of candidates with a less poetic or religiously literate background to be able to think that they might be cantors. And psychologically, by the way, it's important to note, as Nissen Schulman pointed out a couple decades ago, that fixing the siddur actually cuts off free expression in the realm of words. So what outlet is left for creativity in the liturgy if the words are fixed? It can only be music. And this is probably true in Christianity as well. I haven't analyzed it deeply, but with the fixing, right, of the words, once you have the print, once you have the era of print, music starts to take off. Now, I'm going to take you, in this last section, into some of the most difficult and contentious moments that this newly professionalized cantorate caused. On the left, this is Cantor Yechiel Michel ben Natan, originally of Lublin in Western Poland. Here he is in a Dutch etching by Peter van der Berg, circa 1700, and he became one of the cantors of the Great Synagogue in Amsterdam in 1700. You can even see the little guys on the left by his tochis, his 2 little guys. Those are allegedly his mishorim. other than being from Poland, because after the Chmelnytsky massacres in 1648, huge amounts of cantors start moving westward from East Central Europe, from Poland and Bohemia into the West. Not only is he a Polish cantor, but he's introduced these mishorim, these choristers. Now, they don't sing choral harmony like we think of it today. They sing improvised, really almost instrumental sounds in the synagogue to beautify the worship. This is sort of like folk, it's like a folk choir, Ashkenazi folk choir, not like a formal choir at all. But this creates a big problem in the synagogue, which comes to a head during the short-lived tenure of Rabbi Aryeh Leib Kalish, pictured in the top right, who began a yeshiva in Amsterdam. And this is what happens in 1709 in his shul, the Grote Shul, the great Ashkenazi synagogue, pictured on the bottom right. This is from Sefer Megillat Sefer, quote, "At that time, the community was torn by fierce dissension caused by the notorious incident of the two cantors, Reb Yud and Reb Lamed. Many lives had been ruined and much money lost over this quarrel of several years. Indeed, the situation reached such an impasse that on Shabbat Shuvah of 1709, the two factions who contended as to which of the aforementioned chazanim should officiate at the great synagogue came to physical blows. They threw and pushed stenders at one another, lecterns at one another, and it seemed that they intended to cause fatal injury. For our many sins, this synagogue, a mikdash mi'at, became a den of terrorists. But because of the great trepidation and terror that affected the aforementioned rabbi, the guy on the top right, on that particular occasion, he became seriously ill, and returning to his house, he never recovered, for he was struck by a fatal illness." We think synagogue politics is bad today. But a little more about this incident. We know the second cantor in question. It was Rabbi Aryeh Leib ben Zev Wolf. He was cantor of the other Ashkenazi synagogue in town, and his dad was also a cantor in the great synagogue. And that family came from Bavaria. They were West European or German Jews. This guy was a Polish Jew. And so this looks like a fight between a traditional Ashkenazi cantorial family and an upstart Polish musical innovator, which leads to blows and the new rabbi dying of stress, nearly dying, or dying actually, he died, of stress-related illness. Following the rabbi's death, the community leaders banned the meshorer, the bass, from the synagogue, and the chazan, Yechiel, left the community just 3 years later in 1713. So what are we learning from this sad tale? We're seeing the downside of two phenomena that we might recognize. So we have a clash of cultures, and we have the innovation of choirs. As I said, the Chmelnytsky massacres in 1648 taught tons of cantors from Eastern European and Jews from Eastern Europe and East Central Europe, Western Poland, Prague, places like Prague, Western Poland, Moravia, to flee Ukraine, to flee westward into Western Europe. And the sound of Eastern European chazonis in that form starts to be heard in the synagogue. Now, Rabbi Zelig Margolis of Kalish, in his Chiburei Likutim, describes that chazonis from the East has this power of moving people to tears, even more powerful, he says, than rabbinic preaching. And he says that, quote, "Such ability is possessed by the cantors in our country, Poland, only, whereas other countries, the chazanim, have neither melody nor emotion." So we get this emotionalism, this, they call it nigunei hitorut, like the singing that makes you repent. That's like a superpower of Polish chazanim coming westward. So what we might be seeing in Amsterdam is that we have a lot of Eastern European Jews are coming west, and they make up the balabatim. They're in the synagogue, and they want their kind of cantor. So we have a bit of a culture clash. But even a bigger hot topic are those mishorim, or these choirs. And again, they're not like the choirs that we know today. They're really more like proto-a cappella groups. In the same way that Jewish a cappella groups kind of make like instrumental textures, with the drum sounds and making flute sounds. This, by the way, becomes standard and evolves even more in the mishorim tradition into the 19th century, even in the late 18th century. The mishorim are making all sorts of very, very instrumental sounds. And if you look at some of these old manuscripts, they do just as well as violin partitas as they do as cantorial recitatives. So these groups are very popular, but also very controversial. Again, in the world of Kabbalah, where everything is to be intended just so, all this innovation is going to break someone's brain. So what do you do when you're a rabbi or someone else and dislike something but are powerless to change it? Like an 18th century Twitter storm, or X storm, many frustrated rabbis pen scathing critiques of Mishorim and Cantorial leaders. Here are the Mishorim. Here's one of those critiques. This is called Shlosha Tzoakin Ve'inan Na'anin. 3 scream and no one answers them. The author doesn't write his name. He actually writes that he has withheld it because of, quote, the masses who have the spirit of wild madness come upon them. He's leaving this anonymously on a subreddit, just so everyone can read it, but no one can find it. Here, the author directly implicates both German and Polish cantors. He describes their multiplying of new melodies, their ridiculous personal deportment. They hold their ears, they grab their genitals, nebuch, they bend over backwards while they are praying, all to hear their own voices. He then lays in to the bass and zinger, the Mishorim, and he says, you can see, by the way, in the Hebrew on the right where it says levat. This is a joke you can only get in Ashkenazi Hebrew. He says that the second Mishorer stands on the right of the cantor to accuse him. Hu ha'ish asher lakach lo levas. This is the man who took himself as a daughter. But of course, the word daughter, this is from Esther, by the way, right? This is a quote from Esther. But bat in Ashkenazi Hebrew is base, bas, like bas mitzvah, right? But bas is also the way you say bass singer in Yiddish. So here we have probably one of the most gender-bendy moments in the history of the cantorate, where the bass has, because the name in Latin, or bass or bas, is actually the Hebrew word for daughter. In Ashkenazi Hebrew, we have this sort of odd sort of we call it sort of backlash to this implied homoeroticism, or this implied eroticism between the cantor and their singers. So it's a very interesting moment of showing sort of the musical intimacy of this ensemble, and yet it's very uncomfortable. And by the way, in another source, which I'll show you here, they mention, this is from England, where it's a Sephardic person yelling at Ashkenazi, the Ashkenazi cantor sounds so yucky. He describes the bass as Ezer Kenegdo, with the same language as Eve being a fitting helpmate to Adam is the bass to the cantor. So again, there's a very interesting gendered language around the way that the Mishorim are singing with the cantor. It's like this new sort of musical dyad, this musical couple. The rabbis are and critics from across the board are expressing critique in very interesting ways. But the main thing that's going on here is they're complaining all the normal things that you might have heard. Oh, the cantors, they're ignorant in prayer. They extend one syllable really long and another short. They don't go to shul. They have no kavanah. Harsh and in some ways timeless words of cantorial critique. Cantors from time to time still receive similar advice. And again, as I said, this is consistent with the way that Sephardic Jews will speak about Ashkenazi cantors in England. And which brings us, as we come to the end of my talk for today, to Reach Nichoach, to this defense of cantors. And this was the book that I wrote my doctoral dissertation on. He ends up seeing, it shows you it's very cool. Oh, the MS isn't there for some reason. Oh, there it is. Shoshat Tzoakim gets reprinted in 1705. I'm going to take you guys 5 minutes over. I'm so sorry. If you have to go, it's okay. I forgive you. Please forgive me for going over. Eventually, this anonymous broadsheet gets reprinted in Prague around in the first decades of the 18th century, and then this cantor reads it, gets really angry, and writes Reach Nichoach, a defense of his cantorial brethren. And he defends them from all of the typical things that were said before. Oh, the cantors, they're fat and they're ignorant and they ask for too much money and they don't know what they're saying and their choristers are bad, blah, blah, blah. All the things we saw before. One is my favorite critique that he defends against. In Africa and the land of Ishmael, the nations bid us to pray with a wail. But as for us, we thank God have a king of love and mercy. May God lengthen his days and years with pleasantry. Him, his wife, and his seed till generations end, for he has always been good to us. So we have permission to pray as our souls move us, loudly and with music too, and no one complains or gives reproof. Even the princes and governors under whom we dwell, may God lengthen their days and years, treat us well. And what's cool about this is that Rabbi Chazan Circus, Rabbi Yoel Chazan, says we cantors, Ashkenazi cantors, are allowed to be loud. We're allowed to be loud. Why? Because the Sephardim, all these other Jews, the Italians, they are oppressed, and therefore their style is way more ordered and way more soft. But we, because we have great government, we can be as loud as we want in our praise of God. And thank God we have great government, is what he says. So to him, actually, the practices of the Ashkenazi Cantor are not signs of ignorance or oppression. It's the sound of freedom. It's the sound of freedom. So in conclusion, so I'll stop my share and then I'll take some questions after this conclude. The sentiments that I experienced as a cantorial student are actually, as we've seen, they're very old. They're 400 years old at least, and they're about basic human questions of how a musical person who's a Jew can serve as a religious exemplar. It's not always easy, and we see in the example of these historical cantors that the Yetzer struggles within, like with all people. But if the Torah is a song, as I believe it is, and as we affirm with our weekly chanting of its sacred words, then we too can know that our own desire to express, no matter the medium, can be channeled and chanted in service of God. So thank you so much, everybody. I really appreciate you all being here. It's 1:32, so if you have to go, I'm going to take some questions right after I just quickly thank Rabbi Marcia Tilchin and ALI and Madalena for having me here to speak today. And now I will take a chance to answer any questions you might have. Ria, please.
Okay, I don't know if you're aware, there's a wonderful Agnon, the writer,
Yes.
in his book Forevermore. It's a book of short stories. One of the short stories is about Chemdat, the cantor, who has a choristers. It takes place just before Yom Kippur, and it is funny. It's amazing. Are you aware of this? And
I don't
he
know
has
this.
this.
Please send it to me.
He
Any
has
story
this.
about cantors I like knowing about.
Well, and he has this following, and he's over the top in emotions and in eating, and it just fits into your description of the Ashkenazi cantor. So I'll send you the reference. I can't send you the book because through the ether, but I think you'll enjoy it a lot. And I just want to thank you. This was amazing and funny as well, because we have our own stuff, our own shtick with the cantors right now, right? So
Cantors,
thank
we
you.
always have shtick. Thank you, Ria. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Man, it's Marsha. Can I say something?
Please.
First of all, this was, I reiterate what Bria said. This was so fabulous. And, as somebody who knows a bit of the history, but nothing nearly as in depth as you shared, I just, I was smiling ear to ear from beginning to end. So thank you. And I'm so grateful. I think some of our colleagues are with us today. I'm so happy about that. I want to just welcome everybody to the Advanced Learning Institute. Try to bring Matt back as often as we can. And I just wanted to say that next week, for the next 3 weeks, there's a little plug. Rabbi Daniel Levine is doing some of his own sort of personal research on the history of the battle of Jewish identity. What makes somebody Jewish from the outside, from the inside. He'll be looking at, major periods of Jewish history for 3 weeks. All are welcome to come back to any of these classes, even if it was Cantor Math that brought you here today. And I hope we'll see you again. And thank you for those who are able to support this work. We're grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. Other questions?
I have a question.
Please, Cantor Haley.
I absolutely, first of all, I echo what those before me said. This was Such a fantastic presentation. I'm so glad I decided to pop in. And thank you for sharing it on the Cantors group on Facebook. My question was about that multiverse song that you shared. I was particularly curious if you had a translation of those two verses, one about the Sofer and one about the Chazan, which I found particularly, special that they were shared together, as I'm trained as a Soferet, and so that hit me right there.
Oh,
Do you have a translation of that for us, maybe?
you can, I might have it somewhere, but I can probably send you a copy of the whole song. It's in Western Yiddish, which is very close to German. But write me offline, and I'm happy to, or online, but off this, and I'm happy to help you with that. Cantors were traditionally, especially in the Middle Ages, and definitely in places like Prague, where the cantors were, what's special about Prague actually is that whereas in Poland, the cantors really quickly became less religiously knowledgeable, because most of the Polish Jewry was not that knowledgeable except for a few yeshiva buchers. In Prague, they were actually still very knowledgeable. Like Rabbi Ulmo says, these cantors are really smart. I just don't like what they're doing with the whole musica thing and bringing it into shul. And being a sofer was an old cantorial profession. So you are in medieval line of Yerusha, of inheritance.
That's so interesting. And in fact, I was thinking about it when, the quote that I happened to be your narrator for had to do so much with kavanah. And what's interesting is that, to me at least, is that in my work as a soferet, there is so much focus paid to the kavanah, that it has to be recited when one is embarking upon the work. Every single time one is about to say God's name. And then not only thinking, but then saying a specific kavanah, and then reciting each word and each letter of each word. It is a constant focus on the kavanah. And it's just interesting. I mean, I learned, of course, about that in Cantorial school, about kavanah, of course. But our constant focus, at least I don't experience that when I'm serving as shaliach tzibor. It's there, but it's not there every split second. So I found that very interesting.
Thank you so much. Thank you. A lot more to say, but thank you so much. Great. Let's continue that. Other questions? How's the propos?
First of all, Matt, I'm thirsty to drink up your passion for and knowledge for the subject matter. It's just so apparent. I never want to miss one of your lectures because you never disappoint. It's so thoroughly researched and you you go in heart and soul. To address what Haley just said, it's interesting because look, I'm on my 42nd year on the pulpit, and there are, yeah, many times you can't really focus on the kavanah, not only of the text of the prayer you're doing. I allow myself to get into the composer's head of which composition I'm doing, and allow myself to bridge that kavanah and allow that to be the vehicle. We're lucky that we are not just textually bound, because the text now becomes a passenger to the vehicle of music. To sum up the whole, what, 400 or 500 years, Ein Chadash Mitachat Hashemesh. I mean, these same issues. At first, look, my father, blessed memory, was not only a chazan and a rabbi, but he was a sofer and a shochet. He was a kobo, and there were times when he couldn't sleep, he would either compose or he would write a blot of Torah. And that would be his inspiration to continue to make sure he was always totally grounded. So, Haley, I can identify with where you're at, and especially someone from the congregation here at Sharet Tzedek showed me a blot of a Torah that he was reading, and he took a picture of it. that we know the ornamentation, but this was a special ornamentation when it came to the Shirat Hayam, and they had almost it was almost like trees of life that were used. He used dots to create an imagery, and I wasn't even sure. He was asking, "Is this kosher to have on a Sefer Torah?" And I was asking some of my Sofer friends, and they said, "Yeah, there are some times where the Sofer gets so into what they're writing, they want to just actually create an image." Um, and it's the same thing with obviously with melody. So Matt, kol hakavod, thank you. And Marcia, thank you for the institute, and kol hakavod, keep it going. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate that. I think that there's that tension with like what you focus on is so timeless. I came up with something in Baruch of Kalish. He writes literally that the cantor could save the world. This is a guy writing in 1715 that the cantor could save the world by saying the prayers right, but does not, is the greatest tragedy of our time. Like this is almost verbatim what's in there. And so, but again, that's from a time when it's almost like the Kabbalah is like a form of Jewish magic. And if you just say it in this right order, something's gonna happen. So I think that it's, while that's beautiful and like what a beautiful thing to live into, but at the same time, there's this moment where like the expansion of the cantorate is clashing with its huge intensification of all the things you have to do. Like Kabbalah makes being a cantor way more complicated because all you have to know the words. Oh my gosh, I have to know all these secret things that go with the words. That's a lot of stuff. And in some ways, I think that there's like a psychic break that happens within the cantorate in the mid 17th century because it's too much for one kepi, right? We've got all the big music and we've got all the big thoughts. It's a lot. It's a lot. So we get this sort of a beautiful mess of us continuing to work it out together. Okay. Any other questions? Other questions? Murray.
Matt, your knowledge is encyclopedic, and we're the beneficiaries of your presentation. It's reassuring to know, at least for me, that what was going on 400 years ago in the Cantor is pretty much the same as today, because it's that tension between Chazanim being the preservers of tradition versus being relevant. And what I mean by being relevant is being able to communicate to the congregation. So many of our people don't know the tradition. So we can offer the tradition, the traditional prayers, or the nusach, which many of them are ignorant of. We can do that, but do we communicate to them by doing so? Or do we have to do something that's more relevant, something that they know, i.e., incorporating tunes, Broadway tunes, and things of that nature to keep them engrossed in the service? It's a fine line, a very fine line to walk, but it's reassuring to know that this is not anything new. This has been going on for a long, long time.
Thank you. Yes, this debate, I mean, Rabbi Ulmo is on the conservative side of this debate. He's like, nope, Nusach is a closed system. We are not having any of this music in there. But obviously, as we know, he is not the only voice. There are tons of people being like, okay, it's time for some new tech that I'm learning to get to the people, right? So that's what I love about studying this period is that, in the Zultsarian era, in the Zultzer era, in Lewandowski, it's really like a nationalist question. It's like a question of, do we sound like the Germans or the Austrian Empire? But in this early pre-nationalist era, it's just a religious question. Like, it's just a question, does the Hashem Yisborach want me to do this muzika, right? Is this a hidur mitzvah of the mitzvah of prayer? That's what I really love about studying this era, is it gets back to sort of the existential questions that predate the whole nationalism level, which is an important level, but is a later level for us. I have time for one more question.
I just have a follow-up for what Murray was just talking about, because what you were just talking about just happened this past Friday night, where once a month I have a service that I created in the year 2000. Actually, it was for Erev Millennium, and it was I called it Friday Night Alive because Craig Tubman wanted to keep Friday Night Live. It turned into TGIS. Thank God it's Shabbat, thanks to Velvel Pasternak, and it features a lot of the greatest contemporary Kabbalat Shabbat and Friday night music with full band and I have 5 singers with me, and it's a great thing. However, this past Friday night was the only opportunity that I would have been able to do Count Sphera on a Friday night, the first of the month, and it was so I picked see, Sol Zim did a Hineni beforehand, and it was a nice melodic, so I taught it to the chorus with the Hineni, Hineni, Muchanum Zuman, Kayemi Swatase. But for the bracha, I chose the almond, the traditional almond sphera with guitar accompaniment arpeggiated. Okay, people were crying, and I gave them a taste of the real stuff compared to what was, as Mary was saying, what was relevant. Well, you know what? It was just as relevant now as it was, 70 years ago when he wrote it. And that's really the trick of what our responsibility. Yeah, it's a mishmash in your head. However, I always find the traditional chazonis my grounding point.
I feel exactly the same way, and I do feel like the sources really show us that traditional chazanas, one of its superpowers is making people cry.
Yep.
And that's like actually there's actually some discourse, it's in my dissertation, which God willing will be a book one day, about like, is Shabbos supposed to be simcha, or are we supposed to use, this style that was really incubated in the suffering of the Chelmytsky massacres, right, in Poland, in the suffering of persecution? Are we supposed to use that on Shabbos? And there's some discourse about these nigunei hitorarut, the melodies of spiritual unrest, that make people cry, that are associated more with the high holidays. But I think it is, for me, I agree. Chazanis is a total grounding point and is a way to just, you could just pry open a heart that way in the most, in an emotional sense. So thank you for that, David. Thank you. All right, I got to run, everybody. Thank you so much. Again, thank you to ALI for having me. If you're interested in things like this, I write every week on Substack, mattausterklein.substack.com. If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It's free. I have a couple, see if ALI can send, I have a couple readings that I've done related to this that I can send out and make public through that. So again, thank you all so much, and have a good week, and thanks for studying with me today. Cheers.